What follows may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
The world is full of stories. Stories of mysteries, of curiosities, of oddities. Join Kat and Jethro Gilligan Toth for the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected, as they lift the lid and cautiously peer inside the Box of Oddities.
Hey, what are you doing here?
I live here.
Yeah, but you were going to another place, and then you're not.
That's correct.
What happened?
I mean, you know.
Yeah. That's why I said it with that inflection.
Oh, okay.
So what happened?
Okay. So I left here to go to Maine for my mom's surgery, and it was like 4:30 a.m. I get to the airport. Everything's going super smoothly. I got through like nobody's business. I was like, bah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And flew to Quito, which is where I was going to then fly to Miami. And I was in Quito for maybe 7 minutes. I had enough time to get a delicious croissant. And my mom called, and she was like, so there's big storms coming, and we're going to reschedule my surgery. And I was like, coo. And I was like, hey, at least I'm still in the country.
In Ecuador.
And she was like, you haven't left yet. And I was like, I actually have. Left. So I hung out there, delicious croissant again, made some phone calls, and then booked a flight back home. And I was home actually before my next flight would have left.
Yeah,
So
that's right. Yeah.
That was convenient.
Yeah, you left the apartment at 5 a.m, and you were back by 2?
Something like that. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was a real bummer. And the airline that was getting me to the States was actually really cool. And they were like, we understand that things happen. You don't have a changeable ticket, but extenuating circumstances will reschedule you. When is her new surgery date? And
Right.
so I told them.
Right.
And then like 2 hours later, she called me and she was like, so the doctor changed the surgery date again. And so it's going to be on this date, which is a week sooner. And the airline wouldn't change it again. So we were out 1, 2, 3, 4 flights that we just had to eat. The cost of those tickets.
Good times.
It's, I am very fortunate that I have the ability to, first of all, speak enough Spanish to buy a ticket to get home, because I couldn't buy it online. I had
You
to
couldn't
actually
get it
go
online?
to
Oh my God.
the ticket counter, which I've never done before. It was very exciting. And, we're very fortunate that we can move things around and that,
That's amazing that you are at a point now with your Spanish that you feel confident enough to go up to the ticket window and purchase a ticket.
Yeah.
I would have started walking, and I'd probably be getting home in 2 days from now. And that was a week ago.
You do good.
La cuenta, por favor.
Oh, see? See?
Yeah.
So good.
That's come in handy a number of times.
Not recently.
No, we haven't had any time to go anywhere because you've been hanging out at airports.
It's true. Do you have a story for me, sir?
I do, and I thought today we would dive into the Anunnaki. You and I watched a documentary on it a few nights ago, and it's very interesting. I enjoy ancient alien stuff. I don't know if you... So today we're diving into the ancient mysterious world of the Anunnaki. Who were they? So let's dial the cosmic clock back to ancient Mesopotamia.
Love it.
To the cradle of civilization. Picture this. The Euphrates River and the Tigris rivers. Now, They're the lifeblood of a land just beginning to unfold in human history.
Right.
It's called Sumer, and it's a place of ancient towers that scrape the sky and priests who gaze upon the stars with wonder. It's here that the earliest known civilization wrote of the Anunnaki, and their name means, quote, those who from heaven to earth come. Now, according to cuneiform scripts, the Anunnaki were a pantheon of gods and goddesses who were involved in every aspect of human life.
Right.
Every aspect, from growing grain to instituting laws that govern society. The Sumerians believed their hand was in it all. They weren't your garden variety deities who were just content with prayers and
Hands off.
Yeah. These were hands-on influencers, hands-on influencer gods. They believed the gods actually walked among them.
Right.
In the Sumerian tales that are etched in stone and baked in clay, the cuneiform tablets, of which there are thousands, the Anunnaki's presence is felt as almost divine royalty, family dramas that rival any modern soap opera.
Yeah, it seemed like they were both kings and gods, and
Yes.
partook in the society as well.
Yes, there was lust, there was betrayal, there was sibling rivalry, and it was on an epic scale.
Sibling?
Sibling rivalry.
No, yeah.
Now, we're talking about a divine council with the likes of Enki, who is the shrewd god of water and wisdom. And then there was his brother Enlil. He was the lord of the air and the earth. And then their sister, the goddess of love and war, Inanna, who could charm you in 1 minute and then turn you into a pile of ashes in the next.
So their parents were those who liked to name their kids with all the same letter.
Apparently, or
Yeah.
close to it, yeah. The Anunnaki weren't just mythical figures in the minds of the Sumerians. They were also said to be star walkers, travelers of the cosmos. And some interpretations of Sumerian texts suggest that they came to Earth in search of resources, in search of gold specifically, which was more than just a shiny bauble for them. Mm-hmm. It was crucial, some say, for their technology and perhaps even their society. So were the Anunnaki real, or were they product of humanity's attempt to explain the mysteries of existence? The answer is lost in time. For millennia, we had no idea that they believed that the Anunnaki truly existed until we found all these cuneiform tablets and they were deciphered. Their legacy lives on in the myths that have been passed down through ages and in those cuneiform tablets.
Which is such a cool way of writing. When we were watching this documentary, they were showing that some people still carry on this tradition of writing in cuneiform, and they've got like these little triangular
it's like a stylus.
like kind of,
Yeah.
and then they boop boop. It's like they're stamping in the. It's neat. Anyway,
It is. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, Jethro, this sounds like a load of ancient alien hogwash. And to that I say, isn't the world a more interesting place with a load of ancient alien hogwash in it?
I thought it was really funny when we were talking about the documentary that we watched the next day, and I said, "Gosh, I really enjoyed that. I'd like to watch, another like that." And
Yeah.
you went, "Really?"
I was amazed. Yeah.
But it was because it was so much a part of, it wasn't just about the Star Walkers.
Right.
The documentary that we watched was actually about
the Sumerians.
real things.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I liked it.
Let's talk about Zachariah Siten and his mind-boggling 12th planet theory. So who was Zachariah Siten? He came up with this 12th planet theory and a profoundly alternative history of humanity.
This is where we're moving away from the part of the documentary that I enjoyed.
Okay. His theories are interesting, as is his background. Siten he was not a traditional academic of archaeology or any type of ancient studies. He just had a very strong interest in it. And his educational journey and personal interests led him to become a prolific writer and pivotal figure in the world of ancient astronaut theories. He did study economics at the University of London. He has a degree there.
Just to clarify, he has no education.
No, he has education. He's a PhD, I think.
Related to the thing that he's written extensively about.
No, but he's got an education in economics, so he could probably tell us a lot about the ancient alien currency, which I wonder what that was. It was gold-based, obviously.
Obviously.
Anyway, to your point, his education, while not directly related to ancient history or linguistics, contributed to his analytical approach to interpreting the ancient texts later in his life. His academic background in economics does not scream ancient Sumerian scholar. But Sitchin's true educational journey was largely self-directed. He was not a stupid man. He was an educated man.
No, and that's fair. A lot of people who are very, very intelligent have found their own way through education.
He taught it to himself, Sumerian cuneiform, and the languages that were necessary to delve into these ancient texts. And this would give him the basis of some of his theories. It's this endeavor that allowed him to explore the Mesopotamian texts deeply and eventually leading to his controversial interpretations of who the Anunnaki were and their supposed connections to human origins.
Okay.
Now, his lack of formal archaeological education has been a point of contention among critics who often challenge his translations and his interpretations of ancient texts. However, his work has undeniably sparked interest and debate among a pretty wide field of people, bridging the gap between ancient mythology and extraterrestrial speculation.
Okay.
Picture a guy who looks at ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets not as decorative pieces for his living room, but as the ultimate cosmic Rosetta Stone. Sitchin was a scholar, an author, and let's be honest, a little on the fringe. Now, he tossed a grenade into the conventional history narrative with his Earth Chronicles series. He claimed that the key to our past, present, and future was hidden in plain sight by the ancient Sumerians and their stories of the Anunnaki. Now, here's where we connect the dots to our previous deep dive in the Anunnaki. Sitchin's 12th planet theory suggests that there's an additional planet in our solar system. No, not Pluto. Moment of silence for Pluto. But a mysterious, unseen planet that Sitchin calls Nibiru. Now, according to his interpretation of the ancient texts, this planet has an elongated orbit that brings it close to Earth every 3,600 years. And you guessed it, that's, in his theory, the home of the Anunnaki. It's actually a planet in our solar system. But here's the problem I have with this idea, and I know you're expecting me to defend this.
No.
I love the concept, I do. And I want it to be true. But the 12th planet in our solar system that he talks about, so it orbits our sun, if it's in our solar system, and the orbit takes 3,600 years to make one revolution when it comes in close contact with Earth. It actually, in theory, comes in between Earth and Mars, and then back out to space again. The reason given for its 3.6 thousand year solo orbit of the sun is that the orbit is oblong.
Right.
It takes the planet into the far reaches of space. And it seems to me that if it takes 3,600 years to go around, at the furthest point out, those have got to be some pretty cold winters.
That's true.
Because it's so far away from our sun. How could they survive that? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, they're god kings.
Maybe that's what they needed the gold for, to build some sort of
Iron.
like a dome, but out of gold. Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
You'd think that if they were smart enough to get to Earth, they'd be smart enough to know that a dome isn't going to be feasible. Sitchin says that these ancient astronauts were in dire need of gold to repair the planet's atmosphere. And Earth, being the cosmic equivalent of a 24/7 convenience store when it comes to gold, became their mining colony. So every 3,600 years, they drop some people off and pick some stuff up and keep going.
Okay.
Now, if that were to happen, and I haven't researched this, but if a major planet came between Earth and Mars, think of the effect the moon has on the tides.
Yeah.
It would cause worldwide
You think
natural
like
disasters.
A flood, maybe?
Floods, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes. So
Probably
I'm interested.
what happened to Atlantis.
Well, that's one theory.
Oh, for God's sake.
It'd be interesting to go and check and see if there are catastrophic worldwide national
Yeah, if the
or
timeline-
natural disasters. Yeah, every 3,600 years.
Interesting.
Sitchin believed that the Anunnaki didn't just stop with manual labor, making human beings do the work. They took a keen interest in human affairs, and they shaped our civilization, our technology, and even our genetic makeup.
Right.
It's like they were playing an ancient alien version of The Sims, but with real people in higher stakes. We met the lady who does the music, who sings the songs for the Sims series in Thailand. How
Yeah.
weird is that?
Yeah, we love her.
Yeah, she's great.
Vanessa Bryan is her name,
Yeah.
and she's incredible. If you like music, which I assume you do, she's incredible.
And she sings in the Sims language.
And she's in not only,
No.
she also sings in English.
Yeah, and tours with big names.
Yeah.
Anyway, Sitchin's stories goes that these Anunnaki, these ancient astronauts, were in need of workers to mine Earth's gold. And so they, like any self-respecting pantheon of spacefaring beings, did what anyone would do. They played with our genetics. And according to Sitchin's interpretation of the ancient Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki combined their DNA with that of Homo erectus, and that was the most advanced humanoid around at the time. And voila, Homo sapiens were born. Custom made for the toils of mining,
Okay.
and incidentally, for the drama of existence. These newly minted humans were smarter, quicker, more adaptable, kind of a designer species capable of more than their predecessors. The blend of alien and human DNA supposedly didn't just give humans the ability to operate heavy machinery. It's suggested that it also sparked the remarkable leap forward in our cognitive abilities.
Right.
And that's a fact. If you go back and look at the trail of evolution, there's a period of time, in a relatively short period of time, where there's this huge leap in human evolution and consciousness and brain development.
Which led to agriculture and growth in societies and all that business.
Yeah, art, agriculture, language, Uber Eats. All the complexities of civilization can be traced back to this celestial intervention, according to him. Right. And we're not just talking about a minor software upgrade. This is a full system overhaul. But as with any good story, there's controversy. Mainstream scholars will tell you that these claims of DNA manipulation are not supported by evidence and that human evolution can be explained by natural processes. Right. However, for those who do subscribe to the ancient astronaut theory, the idea of the Anunnaki upgrading early humanoids for the sudden acceleration of human development is appealing. Whether you see this tale as a fascinating mythological story or a possible chapter in our untold history, the concept of the Anunnaki's genetic manipulation gives us pause. It begs us to ask whether our intelligence, creativity, and spirit of inquiry is our own, or whether it was a gift or perhaps a loan from the stars. Maybe they're going to take it back.
I remember reading something a while back about how when humans started cooking meat, those added nutrients and aminos and such really lent to the development of our brain, and different parts of us grew because of that. And that just seems like pretty reasonable.
Sure, yeah, but who gave us the fire? Prometheus. So whether you believe the Anunnaki were real or just part of ancient people's efforts to explain the world around them,
sure,
you got to admit it's a story that does capture the imagination. This is hard for me to say. I don't really buy into Zachariah Siten's interpretations, as cool as I think it is.
Sure.
It just doesn't make sense to me.
That's fine.
But let me say this. Ancient aliens are real. Just not from a planet that,
Right. It's the oblong orbit that you have a problem with.
It's science, sweetie. God. I got my information from Britannica, All That's Interesting, and Medium magazine.
That was glorious. I just don't understand why you don't seem as excited about fish tacos as I do.
Well, I've never had fish tacos.
I haven't either.
And it just, the idea of it's weird to me.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's like the first time I heard of turkey burgers,
Okay.
Turkey, what? No.
Is it like how I don't like the idea of chicken in Mexican food?
Yeah, maybe.
Like chicken burrito?
Yeah, I don't know.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm just feeling a little bit off today anyway. I'm a little off balance.
Is it?
It's my socks.
I thought
Yeah, it's my
because
socks.
of your socks.
I have this weird thing where I cannot wear mismatched socks.
Well, you do wear mismatched socks often.
It bothers me greatly, though. Even if they're both white socks, if they're not the same brand.
Yeah, because it's about
me.
the thickness.
Yeah, it is. Like I've got a white sock with gray bottom, and then I've got a white sock with a different gray bottom, and so I feel like I'm off kilter.
You know what's
emotionally.
Wild? This is gonna freak you out, but I am also wearing two different socks right now.
Oh my God!
One's gray and one is white.
But they're both bombas, so they're both equal thickness.
That's right.
So you won't be listing to one side.
I know I packed a pair of gray and a pair of white, and I have no idea what happened to the other. This is my pair of light bombas now.
How frustrating is it every time we pull through clean laundry, I can find 6 different socks and none of them match.
Yeah, we should be better about buying the same kind of socks
I think
all the time.
That should be our ongoing sock buying strategy.
Okay.
Anyway, you got a story for me.
I do.
Okay.
So you remember like 6 years ago, we talked about the jumping Frenchman of Maine.
Yes.
Yes.
The Lumberjacks disease.
That's right. So if you don't remember the Jumping Frenchman of Maine, it was a collection of 19th century lumberjacks who displayed uncommon characteristics. It was a disorder with uncertain origins. They were discovered in the Moosehead Lake region of Maine, and they showcased a amplified startle reflex that came to be in a number of different ways. We'll get into it. They had these abrupt jumping motions that they would do, but they also had these bursts of behavior that didn't make a lot of sense to those who observed it.
Well, if you're out in the Moosehead Lake region, not many people are going to see you anyway.
That's true.
Especially during the lumbering days.
That's right. Yeah. My father's father was a lumberman, more on the coast, but still. And it was one of those things where he would just leave to go do lumbering and come back weeks later.
Right.
It was one of those things where you had to go and do the work and then maybe come home.
Often with an open wound.
Yeah. Or startle reflex that was
That's not contagious.
amplified.
It's genetic, right? What?
Some of these cases also included repeating sounds that you heard, which I have that, repeating movements that you see other people doing, like involuntarily.
Wow.
And a very high state of suggestibility.
So they would be great candidates for hypnosis.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. They would echo commands and actions from other people involuntarily.
I would love to have a French lumberjack under my control to do my bidding.
I don't think that's okay to say.
Well, any nationality lumberjack.
This unusual behavior, being as localized as it was, could be an example of culture-bound syndrome. Culture-bound syndromes refer to a set of mental health issues or symptoms that are distinctive to a particular ethnic or cultural group, deviating from conventional psychiatric classifications. These syndromes are typically limited to specific cultural contexts with a unique connection to the environment that these people might live in. And they're categorized based on shared causes like curses, magic, ancestral influences, leading to diverse clinical presentations. Historically, it's thought that cultural bound syndromes were confined to their region of origin. But as the world changes and populations move and immigrants migrating and they maintain their cultural practices when they move, these new syndromes have been found in diverse global localities, which is kind of interesting.
That was a question I was going to ask you is a large portion of the French population in northern Maine is Cadian French. And they traveled from Louisiana to northern Maine and settled. Were there any incidents of this type of affliction in people in Louisiana?
That's a really great question. I don't have the answer to that.
Fair
Sorry
enough.
about that. Culturally, the psychoses present a challenge in definition because they can be very similar to other disorders or symptoms, but because of their link to the cultural heritage or the location origin, it's different. Which is really interesting. Delusions and thought disorders of ancestral anger can lead to a lot of
ancestral anger.
Yeah, like if your culture has a history of being taken over by other cultures, if your country, for example, was invaded and you had that anger that stayed with you as a culture because you weren't allowed to be your own, you didn't have that freedom or your own culture, or especially if that cultural behaviors or foods, language, whatever, are being squashed, then you would build that cultural anger.
That makes sense.
Yeah. An individual culture might attribute unusual behavior or practices to voodoo as well. But in addition to our nervous Quebecois friends, some examples of cultural bound syndromes are Lhasa, which is similar to the jumping Frenchman of Maine. It stems from Malaysia and Indonesia, and it's an intensified startle reaction, leading to peculiar behaviors. When faced with a startle trigger, the individual reacts with an amplified startle or leap, often dropping or throwing objects that might be in their hands, vocalizing inappropriate words, or mimicking actions of those around them.
It's incredible.
Yeah. In a lot of these cases, these illnesses are most closely connected with schizophrenia or Tourette's syndrome.
That when you said inappropriate words, that's something that popped into my mind.
Muuk is a cultural specific syndrome documented primarily in males from Malaysia, the Philippines, and various regions in southeastern Asia. It involves a phase of social disengagement and indifference followed by an abrupt, unprovoked assault on anyone who might be nearby.
Oh my God.
It's where we get the term running amok from.
Really?
Yeah. It is the Malay word for furious attack. And there are similar syndromes that exist in Polynesia called cafard and in Puerto Rico called mal de pelea. The attacker later succumbs to fatigue and often has no recollection of the incident.
When I was a kid, I always thought it was running in muck. Because that would make me angry. You know,
Absolutely.
If I had to run in muck, you know, your shoes are coming off and you're in your bare feet and you get mud all over your feet.
Yeah. Growing up, you know, in a farm type situation like both you and I did.
Yes.
I mean, you were a little more city folk than I was.
I was a townie.
You were a townie. But I had to go muck the barns. And that meant, you know, and you don't want to run in muck.
Not that kind.
No.
Especially if your shoes come off.
Yeah. I just thought of the feeling of it coming through my Dingo psychosis is a severe cultural bound syndrome present among northern Algonquin indigenous communities in Canada and northeastern United States. This condition is characterized by individuals experiencing delusions of being possessed by a malevolent entity known as the Wendigo, which results in a range of symptoms, including profound sadness, aggressive tendencies, and an uncontrollable urge for human flesh. And tragically, it has led to instances of cannibalism. The condition not only affects the individual, but has a broader cultural and spiritual implication within the affected communities because it's so connected to their cultural beliefs in the Wendigo, and also because you might be eaten. Koro, also known as Shuk Yang, is a cultural bound psychiatric disorder primarily affecting men of Chinese descent residing in southern China and regions of Southeast Asia, where the southern Chinese diaspora have settled. This syndrome is characterized by three main aspects. First, individuals experience delusions of their genitals retracting into their bodies, often accompanied by a fear of imminent death. Second, they undergo intense panic episodes marked by heart palpitations, sweating, nausea, breathlessness, blurred visions, muscle spasms, and pain. And finally, minor complications can arise due to the individual's unique attempts to prevent the perceived shrinkage of their genitalia into their body. They might harm themselves to keep this from happening when it's not actually happening. It's terrible. And again, because it is a cultural phenomenon, it only affects this certain group of people. It's terrible.
Well, I think I speak for all men when I say, oh,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
No one wants that. No person wants that. Shea Ping, also known as Shea Ping syndrome, is a cultural-bound syndrome observed in China and Taiwan. It's also known as ghost sickness. It's marked by these transient, trance-like episodes during which the person being affected is believed to be inhabited by ancestral spirits attempting to communicate with others.
Well, that's fascinating.
This condition typically presents with tremors, confusion, delirium, and visual and auditory hallucinations.
That must be horrible. But I would love to ask them some questions.
Okay,
You know, about the afterlife.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah. I don't think they'd be able to help you. But others manifest dissociative symptoms with crying, laughing, shouting, and hitting one's own head against a wall or a door or something that's available to them, which is such a strange, diverse selection of symptoms.
You can see how many of these symptoms could be, certainly in the past, maybe even in the present, thought of as some sort of
possession.
Demonic possession.
Yeah. Well, because it's so outside the norm, and how do you explain it? And humans' nature is to explain what's happening, even if it means just making some shit up.
Hey, that's worked out pretty well for us over time.
Those with Shea Ping may be locally viewed as having a higher status because they have been chosen by these ancestral spirits to be spoken through. They are a medium for these. So rather than being shunned, like so many with mental disorders throughout history have been, these people have been tasked with this supernatural power and sort of a healing and wisdom feature. It's really interesting.
They're elevated in status.
That's correct.
I wonder if there are any fakers.
You think so?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Like, look at me.
Look, talking in
I
tongues.
can talk to grandma. She's been dead for a while.
Cultural bound syndromes are also known as cultural reactive syndromes, and that implies that the psychopathy is influenced by social and environmental factors. And these manifestations indicate the patient's effort to cope with significant challenges in their lives. And this perspective highlights the interplay between the cultural contexts and the experiences and the mental health manifestations. It underscores the importance of considering socio-cultural influences in understanding what's going on with people and how to help them, which is really interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And so often we see mental illnesses and physical illnesses as being kind of across the board. And that's just, many things play into what goes on within, especially our noggin.
Whenever we do stories like this, like you did the Alice in Wonderland syndrome a while ago, and we got emails from people who deal with that.
Yeah.
And it's just remarkable to me that, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get an email from somebody who has one of these syndromes. I'm sure.
Yeah?
That's the way it always works, it seems.
That's my favorite kind of email.
And mine too.
I mean, I don't love that people have to deal with these things, but it's so amazing that so many incredible people listen to our podcast. And I don't get it.
It's crazy.
Anyway, I got my information from the American Psychological Association, Science Direct, RX List, and the National Institute of Health.
Good stuff.
And now, the Box of Oddities brings you that thing in the middle.
Most female animals have 2 ovaries. However, female chickens have 1 ovary and a prototesticle. If a chicken becomes so ill that it risks its ovary being damaged, it may turn into a male to protect itself. This means that female chickens can turn themselves into males by growing a set of testicles. Males, however, can't convert to females.
This is something a little bit different that we're doing.
But it's so exciting.
It really is. We have a special guest. He's Dr. Stephen Novella. He's on a mission to teach science and critical thinking to the world. He's been active in scientific skepticism since founding the New England Skeptical Society in 1996. He's spent years investigating the paranormal, conspiracy theories, exposing pseudoscience and bad logic, and he is the host of the award-winning podcast, The Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Oh, and to throw in for good measure, he's an associate professor of clinical neurology at Yale University. Welcome to the show. Can I call you Steve?
Absolutely. Yeah, guys. Thanks for having me.
We did an episode, and we thought you would be perfect to kind of explain and expand on this subject. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. We thought if anybody could shed some light on that for us, it would be you. We actually, after doing the episode, got a couple of emails from people who experienced this. How rare is this?
It depends on what you consider this to be. So the full-blown Alice in Wonderland syndrome is fairly rare, but a lot of people have what we call non-pathological symptoms, which are similar to Alice in Wonderland syndrome. So essentially, it's a distortion of perception, right? So, and it could be anything, really. It's most typically perceiving things as being the wrong size, particularly your own body. Like you think your head is huge or your hands are tiny or whatever. But it could be any body part, and it could be things outside of you as well, right? So it could be that you perceive other things to be big or smaller than they are, or far away, or moving when they're not moving. It's really could be anything like that. It's just that your brain is processing things in such a way that it's, something is off, right? It's like it's not calibrating things properly. It's a great example of a lot of neurological issues where it brings to light the fact that our perception of reality, neurologically speaking, is completely constructed. Like everything you feel and perceive about yourself and the universe and the world is a circuit in your brain making you experience that and constructing it in some way. And therefore, everything can go wrong, right? Everything you could perceive there's somebody somewhere whose brain is breaking down in that one specific way, creating bizarre alterations of their reality construction.
Super comforting, Steve. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, appreciate that. Sleep well, everyone. The woman who sent us the email, who experiences some of these symptoms, I guess she has been diagnosed with this. She said that she'll be lying in bed at night, and at first she thought she was just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but then she started to think, no, wait, everything else is getting bigger. Mm-hmm. So it really is. It hinges on perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, everything is always relative, like in terms of, are you getting smaller? Is the universe getting bigger? Right. But yeah, that's a typical case. It does tend for some reason to happen more in the evening. The most common associated condition is migraine, which obviously is very common.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, because migraines can cause alterations in brain function, This is an uncommon, thing to occur with migraines. But for people with Alice in Wonderland syndrome, migraine is the most common associated pathology, right? Seizure being the second most common.
And knowing that everything that we know and experience and feel and all the things has to make its way through your noggin, when you know that it's not working right, how do you make sense of anything? How do you feel a sense of being grounded? How can you trust stuff?
Yeah, you can't, right? So, and most people, when they experience an alteration of their perception of reality, their first instinct is to think something is wrong with reality. They don't think something's wrong with my brain. They think something's wrong with the world, and this is almost universally true in neurology when the deficit is something so fundamentally perceptual. There are some times when people do know that the problem's with themselves. Like when you're weak, for some reason, when you're weak, you generally know it's because it's a problem that you're having. But we call that, by the way, there's a name for it because we see it all the time. It's called anosognosia. It's the inability to perceive that you have a deficit. And although over time, usually people do sometimes figure it out. But like, for example, we see a lot of patients who have aphasia. They can't speak. And they may not realize initially that that's a problem with their brain processing language. And there are numerous cases, reported, and I've seen cases like this as well, where people think that like the world, something's changed about the world. Like they think they've been abducted by a foreign, like they've been arrested by a foreign country, or sometimes even abducted by aliens, because everyone else is speaking a foreign language. It's not their problem; it's a problem with them. I've had patients who thought that the phone was broken. The phone is not working, right? Because they couldn't use it because they had a problem.
Right.
And then, or like one of the more dramatic cases, if you have weakness on the left side for most people, it's the left side of the body that when the non-dominant hemisphere of the brain, say, has a stroke and you can't move half your body. But for that part of the brain, not with your dominant hemisphere, with your non-dominant hemisphere, when you have a sudden deficit like that, usually they don't perceive that there's a problem with themselves. So, for example, patient could be paralyzed on the left side of their body. They can't really get out of bed because half their body is paralyzed. And they say, "Why have you tied me to the bed? You're keeping me from getting up out of bed. It's not a problem with me. It's a problem with something outside of me." So, and the reason for that is because the same circuits in the brain that give you that ability give you the ability to think about that or to perceive it. So by definition, you can't perceive your own deficits, again, depending on the specific type of deficit.
So not recognizing that you're the one with the deficit, is that kind of like a Dunning and Krueger effect?
No, it's not like that. But because Dunning-Krueger is basically normal, everyone has that. Whereas this is specifically referring to a pathological state. But it's a good general lesson, right? And you kind of asked the more general question initially, is like, if weird shit is happening in the world, how do we know it's happening out there and not in our brain?
Right.
And the answer is you don't, and you should consciously always assume it's probably something happening in my brain, rather than assuming that this is something paranormal or supernatural happening out there in the world. And you will almost always be correct. But how do you ultimately know is you have to corroborate it with objective evidence, with other people. If everyone's perceiving something, it's probably real. If just you are perceiving it, it's probably you.
And there are a lot of external stimuli that can cause that to happen too, like low frequencies. I've heard that can cause almost a hallucinogenic effect on some people.
Or shrooms.
Well, certainly we can induce it pharmacologically. Right?
Yeah.
You can induce these states, absolutely. You can get it through sleep deprivation. That's a more benign way for that to happen. We are learning how to do it electromagnetically, like using transcranial magnetic stimulation. We're going to turn off this little circuit in the brain, and suddenly people feel like they're floating outside their body, or they're one with the universe, because there's a circuit in your brain that tells you this is where I end and the universe begins. And if that circuit isn't working, you're one with the universe. There is no end to you. Or you may feel as big as the earth because your perception of your size, again, is there's got to be circuits in the brain working. I mean, everything, things like you don't even realize you're doing, like the fact that you own your body parts and you control your body parts. That's an active neurological construction. You don't feel that way because it's true or because you are your body. You feel that way because there's a circuit in your brain that makes you feel that way. And that circuit can be damaged or temporarily disrupted pharmacologically or electromagnetically or whatever.
So it would be like alien hand syndrome.
Exactly. What's going on with alien hand syndrome? Again, our brains have to actively make us feel as if we're in control of our body parts. And it does that by comparing the circuit for your desire to move and then the visual and tactile feedback that you are moving. And like when everything syncs up, the brain's like, it's okay. Everything is synchronized. What I want to do is actually happening. Therefore, I own this hand. I control it. I'm getting the physical feedback. And if those circuits are not synchronized or one of those circuits is broken, suddenly you feel like you can't control, like something else is controlling your hand, even though it's not. You are still controlling it, but you don't feel that way. And we're learning this also with prosthetic robotic limbs, right? If you give somebody a robotic arm and if you don't give them sensory feedback, it doesn't feel like they own it. It's like it's attached to them and they have to look at it carefully and concentrate to get it to do stuff. But if you give it haptic feedback, like tactile feedback, suddenly it feels like it's part of them and it's a lot easier to control even when they're not looking at it. It's a more natural part of their body. So that's the good news is that our brains are kind of easy to hack, right? It's like you could actually trick our brains into thinking that a robotic arm is your arm. You just have to close the loop on those sensory feedbacks. You could feel as if you occupy a digital avatar, in a virtual reality. You feel like you're the digital avatar if the visual feedback synchronizes,
Well, speaking of that, do you think that it's possible that we are in some sort of a virtual landscape?
Yeah, I mean, that's the unanswerable question if you premise it as, could this be a virtual reality indistinguishable from physical reality? By definition, you can't know the difference if they're indistinguishable. And the other thing is, if we are virtual entities in a virtual reality, then no, how could we tell the difference? Because we are part of the matrix, right, as it were. And I know there's the physicists who say, what are the odds we're in a simulation? I don't think it's an answerable question, but they go through these interesting thought experiments about, well, probably most. If any universe develops the ability to simulate a universe, then there's going to be way more simulated universes than real universes. And so chances therefore are that we're in one of the simulated ones rather than one of the physical ones. I don't know that totally scans, but that's the argument that some people make.
Sure.
Let's shift gears just for a second.
Yeah.
We were watching the other night a documentary, and it dealt with Zachariah Siten and his interpretation of the ancient Sanskrit text and how he has put forward for quite some time a theory that there was an alien race, the Anunnaki, who came to Earth to mine gold and manipulated our DNA to do their bidding. He's clearly an educated guy. What are your thoughts on his theory?
Yeah, so the word we use for somebody who is generally educated or sounds erudite but spouts utter nonsense is a crank. And I think that is the category that he would fit into. He's a perfect example of a crank. And what is a crank? It's somebody who going through the superficial motions of doing scholarship or science, but there's something wrong, right? They're doing something fundamentally wrong. And in his case is he's starting with his answer, right? He's saying, all right, what if all of these ancient Sumerian texts are describing alien visitations to the Earth? And then he looks at everything through that filter. Rather than trying to prove his hypothesis wrong, which is what a good scholar should do, he's always trying to prove it right. And the thing you have to remember is we have tons of Sumerian archaeological texts and artifacts and material, right? It's not like we're looking at 3 things and trying to figure out.
Yeah.
There's hundreds and hundreds. And so there is a deep Sumerian archaeology, ancient Sumerian scholarship that exists. There are people who have dedicated their life to speaking the language and understanding the symbols. Right. And he can't convince those people, the experts. And there's a reason for that, is because what he's spouting is amateurish nonsense. And he says things that are demonstrably false. So, for example, in one tablet, he'll say, that's the sun. Like, that symbol there is the sun. It's like, well, the expert will say, well, wait a minute. We have hundreds of other tablets where the sun is consistently represented by another symbol. So why is this one the exception? And it isn't, but he wants it to be because it fits his narrative that he's told, because there's the 12 planets, and the sun's the first planet. And this fits my narrative, so I'm going to say that's the sun. Why? Right. It doesn't fit every other piece of evidence. So he completely ignores mountains of evidence, mountains of scholarship. He selectively just cherry picks things that he thinks look interesting and he could twist to fit his narrative. And that's not science. That's not scholarship. It's not archaeology. That is being a crank. That is, you have a narrative. You're going to cherry pick data, ignore mountains of other data, ignore the experts. And so, of course, he doesn't convince anybody who actually knows what he's talking about. But it's very easy. The other thing to know about the cranks is that because they're sophisticated nonsense, it's easy, if you just take their perspective, you could write a book or make a documentary that just presents their cherry-picked viewpoint, and it could seem superficially compelling. And there's a ton of this stuff out there where it's like, if all you know is what's in this one guy's book, it sounds like he's making a compelling case. But that's because you're not aware of all the other stuff that he's not including in his narrative. Right, so you read like a book like The Naked Ape, just as pick a random example, where some guy thinks humans evolved from, or the aquatic ape is what I'm talking about, where they think our immediate ape ancestors were adapted to the water. And why do you think that? And he has all this circumstantial, superficial evidence, the swirls of the hair in the embryo, whatever. It's all nonsense. But he writes a book-length argument for that position, but it's all cherry-picked. Yes. It ignores all of the actual biology that actual biologists understand and paleontologists, and there's a complete absence of any objective evidence for his perspective. But, if you don't know any of that and all you know is what's in that book, it sounds really compelling, So you always have to know, like, does anybody disagree with this guy, and why do they disagree with this guy? And what do the experts think about this guy? And until you know that, you can't really have an informed opinion about what they're saying.
I think that's one of the things that I liked best about the little blurb that JG had about you, was not just that you have all of this experience and you know all these things, but that your effort is to teach people how to critically think.
Yeah.
And you can know a lot of stuff, but not necessarily be good at that part. And that's so important.
It's a separate skill. Critical thinking is its own skill. And, we encounter people who are otherwise very educated, even scientists, experts, but they're not critical thinkers, and they could fall prey to a lot of the pitfalls of human thinking. So scientific skepticism weaves together a number of things, right? So one is just what we call scientific literacy, right? You have to have a basic understanding of science and how it works. Another one is critical thinking skills, which includes, like, how does our brain work? How does psychology work? What are all the pitfalls of human thought? Biases. And let's try to just police our own thinking, make sure we're not committing logical fallacies or mental errors. And this gets, pretty sophisticated. And there are psychologists who have spent the last 100 years studying this. We're just benefiting from their work, heuristics. What are heuristics? It's just little mental shortcuts that people generally make. And if you're not aware that they exist, you're going to make them and not know it. And so you're going to fall victim to these little mental shortcuts that our own brains make that are not strictly true. So that's
Can I have an example?
There's another piece to it. What was that?
Can I have an example of that? Heuristics?
Yeah. So like one heuristic is what we call the representativeness heuristic, which means that, and this comes up in medicine a lot, and I apply everything I'm talking about, I always, of course, apply to my own profession. So we teach medical students, like, what diagnosis do you think this patient has? Here are his 5 symptoms. And the symptoms are all typical of a specific disease, right? But it's a trap, right? Because they're typical of an extremely rare disease. But there may be a little bit atypical of but still consistent with a very common disease. Mm-hmm. And the medical student will go for the rare disease every time because that's the way our brains work. Mm-hmm. Our brains go, that's representativeness. It's representative. It's typical of but what we don't intuitively consider is the statistics, is the base rate. So it's like, this may represent 1% of this common disease, but there's millions of people with that common disease. And it may be absolutely typical of this rare disease, but it's a 1 in a 10 million disease, right? So just statistically speaking, there's thousands of more people with the atypical common disease than there are people with the typical rare disease. But unless you do the statistics, your intuition will lead you to the rare disease, which is, that's the representativeness heuristic. The failure to consider the statistics and to only consider like how typical does something sound. Now, so that's like one example.
You've been investigating strange, unusual, paranormal activities over many, many years.
Yeah.
And I know the word skeptic is right in the name of your podcast. Has there been anything that you've seen that you can't 100% explain?
Well, say 100% explain, most things. We can't explain most things 100%.
All this.
Yeah. So, but let me just say this: I haven't seen anything, and I'm actively looking for it. I consider myself to be an open-minded skeptic, which is the only way to be a skeptic, right? So what that means is not that we're gullible. It means that we follow the evidence fairly, like wherever it leads, right? And we have the same set of criteria for believing things, whatever they are, right? And I'm happy to be convinced. Like people make it seem like I'm dismissive or something, but I have to realize the best thing that could happen for my career is if I am convinced by evidence and logic that something really weird is true. Imagine how awesome that would be for my career as a science communicator if I could say, hey, this sounds super weird, but trust me, it's really true, and here's how I know it, But I have not encountered anything like that, not even in the slightest. The vast majority of claims of paranormal and supernatural, whatever claims, are childishly horrible. They really are. They're always orders of magnitude worse than you think they are. And like early on in my career, I massively over-prepared for every investigation because I thought it was going to be a lot more sophisticated and subtle than it was. And it always turns out to be stupid as hell. Like it really is like not challenging. Most of the stuff is so transparently nonsensical. It doesn't take a lot of expertise to figure it out, right? Then there are some things which are just legitimately strange, but we don't have enough information. So those are the things I can't fully explain.
Right.
Like, can I explain every light in the sky? No, of course not. Some things are just, you don't have enough information to explain them. People give me anecdotes with no evidence. It's like, okay, you experienced that. You have a memory of having experienced that. Right. Now, I know generically speaking, your memory is probably wrong. Your perception was probably wrong. Here's all the ways in which all of those things could be altered. So I can't really trust your anecdote, but do you have any objective evidence I could take a look at? No. It's like, okay, so I'll never know what actually happened, but I have no evidence for me to think it's anything other than what we know to be true, that perception and memory are horrible and not to be trusted.
And
right?
Again, circling back to, we assume that it's the rest of the world that's gone awry and not something within us.
Sure. I mean, like if you see, we encounter optical illusions all the time. Now, sometimes you're looking at an optical illusion. It's presented as an optical illusion, and they're fun. They're fun because they freak us out. Because for a moment, they confront you with the fact that your perception is constructed. And we can easily hack into that and make you falsely construct something. In fact, neurologists use optical illusions as a way of studying visual perception. And they use that to demonstrate their hypothesis. I think that this circuit is doing this. If that's true, then we can make an optical illusion where we trick people into thinking there's movement when there isn't. Or we can alter color perception, or we can alter. And there's all kinds of different optical illusions, but they're all neurological phenomena, right? But sometimes we encounter optical illusions and we're not aware that that's the case. And our brains are always just doing their best. They're just making the best guesses that they can to
doing a good job, honey.
To fit what we see into the most likely interpretation, right? So if you see an elephant and your brain's going to go, that's an elephant. I know that elephants are really big, so that's got to be really far away. And that's a reasonable assumption. That's probably right most of the time. But if it was a tiny elephant, it could trick your brain into thinking it's far away when it's really close up. And of course, magicians use this kind of thing all the time. They know from hundreds of years of just practical experience that your brains are likely to make certain assumptions and therefore construct their perception based on those assumptions. And if they could subvert those assumptions, they could trick you into perceiving anything they want you to perceive. And it blows your mind because you don't know the tiny little stupid trick. And I've had a magician, more than one magician, tell me, like, how does that trick work? It's like they always say, it's always a lot more dumb than you think. Like it's really always, it's like embarrassingly dumb. You know, it's like David Copperfield, who we interviewed for our show, had a great way of putting it. He said the magician's true power, their true power, is that you would never imagine that somebody would spend that much time and effort to do something that stupid. Like that small and trivial. Like they just work on figuring out some stupid little thing to do, and you would never imagine somebody would dedicate that much time and energy to doing it. That's the trick. Yeah. Right. That's the magic trick. It's never as sophisticated and elaborate and whatever as you think it is. It's just they've figured out one little hack that makes you interpret things differently, and it fools you. And we're just really easy to fool. You know, it's just the way it is.
Some more than others.
We just got to have that check. You know, that's what the skepticism is. Like, I know I'm easy to fool. You have to be humble, right? We talk about neuropsychological humility, right? We have to be humble to realize our brains are easy to fool. They're easy to hack. We're susceptible to misperceptions, to biases, to, you know, all sorts of things. And so I always have to assume I'm wrong and I'm flawed. And therefore, I have to check what I think I perceive or think I remember against it, the most objective, you know, things that I can find out there, other people, objective facts, reproducible things. That's what science ultimately is. We're just trying to control for all of our biases and standardize things, you know, and measure them, et cetera, because, you know, human beings are remarkably easy to fool. And if you don't think that's true, you are the biggest fool. That is the biggest deception, is this notion that you can't be fooled. Then you are a mark. That's what the con artist will call them. Somebody who thinks they can't be fooled, a really good target.
Yeah, and when they are fooled, they are hesitant to admit that they've been fooled when they find out. They refuse to admit it.
Yep, and con artists count on that as well. They count on the fact that their victims are not going to want to say, I was stupid, I was tricked. Which is why we have to remember people like you're a victim. Like there's nothing to be ashamed of. Anybody can be tricked. And, you know, there's a lot of news stories out recently about like smart people, like, you know, professionals, even like people who work in law enforcement being conned by, you know, sophisticated con artists who are getting really good at their job. Like they're getting really good at conning people. And they know how to manipulate you people. Like they know how to manipulate, and they're just constantly searching for it. And it's amazing how even like, you know, again, very educated, intelligent people can fall prey. Now, once you know it's a con and you're hearing this story, like, how could this guy have been so stupid? It's like, yeah, but you don't understand. They were actively, dynamically working it. right? Or her, right? They were working them over months to get them. You're now looking at it from the outside, and you know it's a con. And of course, in retrospect, it always seems like, how could they possibly have fallen for this? It's like, because that's just human nature, and
that's the magic trick.
That's the magic trick. And these guys are magicians. They're psychological magicians who are manipulating people. If you guys have probably experienced this in the last month, I probably have been called a dozen times by people who are phishing. They're trying to scam you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I usually stay on the line long enough to I play along until I learn what the con is, right? And then once I figure out, this is how you're going to get me to send you money. Then it's okay. Fuck you, go away. Now I was just wanted to know what the con was,
Yep.
We got one of those calls one time. Our cat did, and she stayed on the line and pretended that she was one of those 1-900 sex lines that they had called by mistake, and she had him right by the gills.
Yeah. No, but they'll do stuff now. They'll say, I'm not going to ask you for any personal or identifying information, right? So they're reassuring you that they're legit. I'm not going to ask you, that's what magicians do too. That's misdirection. That's classic misdirection, right? So we have to, again, the one of the most essential protections against being fooled is to be humble, is to realize that you can be fooled. Right. So you need to be careful. You need to have a process, right? So there's a process in place. I don't care how convincing somebody is, you never engage with somebody who calls you, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's just it. Because the IRS is never going to call you.
No.
It's just never going to happen, right? And there's just you learn the red flags. If they're trying to pressure you or scare you or keep you isolated, don't tell other people or whatever, these are all red flags. Listen to them. The first thing you should do is go to somebody else and say, what do you think about this? Is this legit? That's the first thing you should do.
We actually almost missed out on a really interesting conversation with a celebrity because they reached out to us and wanted to talk with us. And I went, delete it. It's spam. No,
right.
No, don't click that. Nope.
Interestingly, though, it ended up to be really the person who they said it was. And
I almost ruined everything.
Yeah.
Once again.
Oops. This has been fascinating. And we are so grateful that you've been so generous with your time. Tell people a little bit more about Skeptics Guide to the Universe and where they can find it and find out more about you.
Yeah, so it's a podcast. We're coming up this year on our 1,000th episode. So we've been doing this for a while, obviously. So the skepticsguide.org. If you go there, you'll find pretty much everything. So, I've got a couple of blogs. We've published 2 books, The Skeptics Guide to the Universe and The Skeptics Guide to the Future, which is fun. It's all about future technology and everything. We do live streams on Wednesday and Friday. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook, all the social media stuff. But the flagship is the podcast. So you go there, and then you'll get to everything else from there, theskepticsguide.org.
Thanks again for your time. And would you be willing to come back on sometime in the near future?
Yeah, anytime. Always happy to talk about skepticism with you guys.
I cannot tell you what a pleasure this has been. As the skeptic on our show, this has been delightful.
Yeah. I want to believe that there's something behind the veil, but like you, I need to be convinced.
That's fine. I say that's fine. Listen, we're human beings. We're hardwired for spirituality. We need to feel connected. We need to feel there are things that are bigger than us. I get all that. But you just have to want to believe what's actually true a little bit more. That's just got to be that's what I always say. I don't care what the truth is. I just want to believe what's actually true. You're right. And most people
That's
do.
fair.
Most people do, but it's just not the number one thing on their list. I just want that to be the number one thing on my list. It just has to. As long as it's true, I'm okay with it.
Steve, you're my new favorite.
Yeah, me too. We would love to be able to list you as a go-to guy for various topics. And thank you again for your time and for
doing what you do.
And for doing what you do. Because there's a lot of marks out there.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, guys. Thanks a lot.
I love that guy. I love that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. He reminds me of somebody. Who does he remind? He reminds me of somebody.
Don't know.
Dr. Drew. He reminds me of Dr. Drew, but with far better credentials.
Let's not make an enemy of Dr. Drew.
No, I like Dr. Drew. I've met him a couple of times years ago, working in radio in Los Angeles, and he was a darn fine person.
That tracks.
Yeah, it does. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with us, you guys. We love to hear from you. Curator at theboxofoddities.com. We've got an Inbox of Oddities episode coming up.
Yep.
Next.
Be a part of it.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
Until then, keep flying that freak flag.
Fly it proudly, you beautiful freaks.
And so, let it be known that the Box of Oddities belongs to you, and its fate is in your hands. Therefore, it's been requested by those to whom I report to beseech you for assistance. We ask but one thing of you, to provide a 5-star rating and a positive review. True, that is 2 things. However, 'tis merely a 5-star rating and a positive review. Also, subscribe to us. Okay, so 3 things is all we ask. 3 things and 3 things only. Henceforth, the Box of Oddities commits to the telling of stories. Stories of the strange, the bizarre, the unexpected. We wish to offer our deeply felt gratitude and appreciation for your patronage. TheBoxOfOddities.com. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.